Howdy folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your host, the Mighty Bjorn, and today for you folks, I have a new Warhammer 40k Wrath and Glory video, and that is because today, Cubicle 7 has finally released Sons of Russ, which is a supplement for Warhammer 40k Wrath and Glory. I actually had seen that this new supplement was going to be coming. I think it was about a month or so ago. I actually had seen the announcement of the new supplement, and I even mentioned it previously a little bit on my YouTube channel. I made a post about the new supplement coming. Now, with all that being said, this is actually the second time that we're getting a book that is directly geared towards a Space Marine chapter, with the first one being Vow of Absolution. And essentially that was focused around the Absolvers chapter from Warhammer 40k Wrath and Glory. And much like that book, this is very similar, where it's completely geared towards playing as Space Wolves. With that being said, you could also use it to play as one of the successor chapters of the Space Wolves, as they have various chapters within the Space Wolves itself. Now, really quick before I dive into the video today, there is a bit of a disclaimer. One, I've only had the book for a couple hours. I've been able to go through the book. It's a little shy of 100 pages, but I haven't been able to really take a really deep dive into the book. So a little bit of the information that I'm providing you is a bit reactionary to what I see in the book and what I like about the book itself. Next thing I want to bring up too is Cubicle 7 does not know who I am. I purchased this book with my own money, so this is my personal thoughts and opinions about the book itself. The final thing I want to mention too is, while I would have liked to have taken more time to actually go through the book and provide you an even deeper review of the book, I really can't, because I do have some personal things going on in my life right now that's actually going to kind of take me out of action for a little bit. There'll still be YouTube content coming because I have a bunch of content pre-recorded, but this kind of fell in my lap at the last minute. I really didn't even know this book was going to be released today, and I'm literally technically should be sleeping right now for what's going on tomorrow, but that's neither here nor there. Let's kick out this review. Let's dive on into it. And realistically, the first thing I want to discuss, because it's what caught my eye the most, is the art of the book. The art itself is just really well done, and it really captures the Space Wolves in a lot of different ways. And for the most part, the art is really top-notch. However, there's a couple of pieces, one in particular, that caught my eye as not being very well done, being very grainy in the PDF copy that I received from Drive-Thru RPG. The next thing that also caught my eye very quickly was that the book itself is very well bookmarked. You can find things very quickly within the book. They definitely have all the important stuff highlighted. Now, the book itself, as you go into the book, you get your table of contents, and it covers, literally at the very beginning of the book, it covers Leman Russ, who is the Primarch of the Space Wolves chapter, and then it also covers Fenris. I wouldn't say it covers Leman Russ himself in very great detail. It gives you a very good overview, but realistically, if you want to know more information about Leman Russ, you're going to want to find yourself like a YouTube video, or you're going to want to read the Wikipedia or find various books if you want to get more detailed information about Leman Russ himself. With that being said, the overview they gave, in my personal opinion, is good enough because he's not really the primary character. Your players are the primary character. Now, when it comes to Fenris, it does a pretty good job giving you the idea that it's an ice-covered hellhole. There you go. That's the best way to put it. Now, when it comes to general lore overall about the Space Wolves chapter, it does a very good job. It covers various aspects about the Space Wolves and it even covers the curse of the Wolven, which essentially is a curse that is related specifically to the Space Wolves and the successor chapters. So really good overall right there. One detail as I was going through that I really liked is it gave you a quick little name generator to essentially create your character, and essentially it runs on a D66 system. Essentially you run 2d6 with one d6 counting as 10, the other d6 counting as your singles, basically 1 to 6. And then essentially you just follow the chart here, and essentially you do that twice to create your character. Now, of course, you can go other ways about it because, well, they're essentially Norseman, Viking type names. So obviously you can name your character whatever that you're aware of, but this gives you a good overall feel and view of the various names of a Space Wolf, Space Marine. Now, the book itself also has a new creature. In particular, it has the Fenris Wolf, and this is actually the image I was talking about. This is actually from the book, and I don't know why when I was looking at it through my PDF viewer, it just looked kind of grainy and low resolution. I'm not quite sure what that was about. And this is actually what it looks like here. It might not look on bad as on YouTube as it did when I zoomed in on it. And it's just like, ugh, this not very well done on this image. With that being said, none of the other art I could really complain about, just this one in particular. The book is also packed full of new archetypes for your Space Wolves. And essentially you get Bloodclaw, Grey Hunter, Wolfguard Head Taker, Wolfguard Terminator, Wolf Scout, Skyclaw, Longfane, Rune Priest, Iron Priest, Wolf Priest, and Wolfen as your various different archetypes that you can play as. So it's actually pretty jam-packed with archetypes that is all specifically geared towards Space Wolves, and they all fit various different roles within the Space Wolves chapter of Space Marines itself. And realistically, between the special archetype abilities, equipment, and various other factors, it really captures the different various aspects of the Space Wolves very well. As while in general terms, they're Space Marines, these are more kind of specialized, trained, and experienced troops that's more relatable to the Space Marines. Good Lord, tongue-tied there. That's more relatable to the Space Wolves themselves, and these are things you don't see in other Space Marine chapters. It also covers the various powers of the Rune Priest. So there's quite a few psychic powers there, and all of them are in direct relation to the Rune Priest itself. So once again, these are powers and abilities that you're not going to find in other Space Marine chapters. The next thing to really discuss is also the new various talents in relation to the Space Wolves themselves. You got a few different ones there that only really covers a page, but for just a couple of examples, you have Savage Counterstrike, where it essentially allows you to spend a wrath point. Well, essentially, whenever an enemy misses you in melee combat, you may spend a wrath point to immediately counterattack as a free action, but of course you got to spend that wrath point. There's also Berserker Charge, Headstrong, and there's a couple of them there. There's only about 6 total, but it's kind of cool that essentially if you're playing as a Space Wolf, you have talents that is open to you because you're playing as a Space Wolf, and all of them are Space Wolf only. As part of the keywords, although Adeptus Astartes is there, but I believe you also need to have the Space Wolves keyword as well to be able to use those special abilities, talents. There is also an equipment section in the book itself. A lot of the equipment that is related to Space Marines that the Space Wolves also use is there, such as like the Storm Bolter, your various different types of bolters. I believe the plasma gun was there, so on and so forth. But there's also several new weapons, such as the Runic Axe, the Frost Axe, the Hellfrost Cannon, Runic Armor itself, Fenris Armor, and even some pieces of equipment. One example is the Belt of Russ. So there's a couple new weapons as well as some new armor and new pieces of equipment to use as a Space Wolf for your Warhammer 40k Wrath and Glory campaign. The next section itself gets into Dreadnoughts, which it covers a little bit about Dreadnoughts. It's more lore, but it does give you an example of a Dreadnought. And of course, it also covers probably the most famous Dreadnought of all the Dreadnoughts, which is Bjorn the Fell-Handed, as you can see him here. And he's also one of the oldest Dreadnoughts, if not the oldest Dreadnought within Warhammer 40k, because essentially he was actually around back during the days of the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy. Now, the book itself also does have an adventure module that is for tier 3 or 4 characters, and essentially it's versus orcs on Xander Secutus. And essentially, I didn't really get to cover over this section all too well. This was probably the one section I really wish I would spent more time on. But from what I see in information-wise, it's not too bad. It does also include the war boss himself, or at least stats for him, and it also includes stats for orc war boys. With that being said, there's a lot of other books out there that I think does more justice to kind of bring the orcs to bear for a Warhammer 40k Wrath and Glory campaign. But with that being said, the adventure module is a great way for the characters to kind of get their feet wet, kind of learn more about the lore and everything else surrounded about the Space Wolves, and in a roundabout way, even about their superstitions with what I've seen with the adventure module. And it's broken into 4 separate acts. So it's actually not a very long adventure module, but it also only takes a very small section of the book. I think like 15 pages, maybe 20 pages of the book was directly covering the adventure module itself. So it's not a very chunky adventure module. But like I said, it's also a great way for your players, yourself as a game master, and the players to get their feet wet within the realm of Sons of Russ. So overall, my conclusion of the book. Well, personally, from what I've seen in the book, I actually think it's a rather good book. However, I do see one huge glaring issue. And honestly, in my opinion, it suffers from the same issue that Vow of Absolution does, which it's specifically geared towards essentially a specific Space Marine chapter. Now, with that being said, with Vow of Absolution, it was geared towards the Absolvers chapter, which themselves is a successor chapter of the Blood Angels. So, in my opinion, that kind of hurts that book a little bit, but not so much, because in general terms, it was geared towards the Gilead system, which it was the bigger campaign scope overall. With this one, it takes you out of the Gilead system, which I think is a nice detail, but it covers essentially the Space Wolves, and that's really about it. Now, of course, you could use this book to do a Space Wolves successor chapter, because the information, the various different types of archetypes, equipment, etc., will still work playing as a successor chapter of the Space Wolves. So even if you don't want to play Space Wolves directly, you want to play as one of the like secondary chapters or sub chapters, if you will, of the Space Wolves, The book is still good for that. I also think, in general terms, the art's great. The layout of the book is great. I mean, there's a lot of things in the book itself that's great, but I also think its biggest flaw is the fact that basically it's completely 100% focused on Space Wolves. So essentially, it's kind of one of those. This book really is not worth the money if you're not going to do something in relation to Space Wolves. Now, with all that being said, I still think the book is good overall. And when it comes to the cost of the book, I picked up my PDF copy on DriveThruRPG for $20. Now, I looked it up on the Cubicle 7 website for how much the printed copy is, which they're taking pre-orders for right now as I'm recording this video, and it looks like it's going to be around 38 USD. Personally, I think that's a little steep for this book. Almost $40. I do understand inflation and everything else is up. But personally, I just don't see it worth being $38 for a printed copy. However, $20 for the PDF, honestly, I think that's a great deal. And overall, but that's also in relation to, are you going to do something in relation to Space Wolves? Because if you're not going to, honestly, I would sideline this book. I really wouldn't get it. Obviously, the next factor too is, are you a fan of Space Wolves? Then, in my case, I am a fan of the Space Wolves. So for me, it was $20 well spent. And yeah, I say this grumpy old Viking approves buying this book. But that's just my personal opinion. It's not bad book overall. Just kind of very limited in scope. Either ways, folks, that is my review of Sons of Russ for Warhammer 40k Wrath and Glory. Hopefully you all enjoyed this review. Thank you very much for tuning in, and have yourselves a wonderful day.